see what.
We know already from the most recent report of the Inouye Committee, that's the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee in the United States, their report was published in May, that the CIA continues to engage in these covert action operations to penetrate and to manipulate political parties, governments, trade unions, public information media, professional and cultural societies, in other words, the institutions of power of other countries. And this is the thing that I and many others would like to make as difficult and as visible as possible. And I think that one has also to ask and perhaps look for the answer to the question, what is the CIA doing right now in France? They know that I have a nose for their types of activities. And as some of you will recall, I think there was an exposure of about 60 CIA people in the embassy in Paris about 2 years ago. So they have a huge office there. It's almost as big as the one in London.
All right, now that, of course, is not David Atlee Phillips. That's another Philip, as in Agee. But he was a contemporary of David Atlee, right? Or overlapped?
Well, I think they overlapped. I mean, that's kind of what's happening there. That's in 1974. I mean, our story starts in 1950, 1945. But that's kind of like at the end of the story, because Philip Agee, who is a Marxist affiliate, I'll just tell you now because it doesn't really matter in terms of the story because it's kind of past the end of our story. Philip Agee puts out a book called Inside the CIA. He is a compromised by Cuban intelligence. He doesn't reveal any of this. Of course, this is all what's been revealed years later. Couldn't care less about the KGB, couldn't care less about his own country, flees to Canada. He outs hundreds of CIA agents, their wives, their families, who, including, people who, their phone numbers, their addresses. The initial release by Agee, this is not in the book. He has these press conferences around the world, and he's constantly on the run because he thinks he's going to get killed, which is not insane. He outs 37 people initially, 12 of them, I'm talking about names, addresses, phone numbers, where they're living around the world, Eric, okay? 12 of the original 37 are female secretaries who work in the embassy. There's a couple that were best friends. There was a couple that was best friends with David Atlee Phillips and his wife. And as this was happening in December of 1975, Dick and Kika Welch had been assigned to the State Department in Athens, where he was bureau chief, CIA bureau chief of Athens, which was a crazy hotbed. I just want to get this out of the way, but it was a crazy hotbed of activity in 1975, in case many people remember. Because of Philip Agee, David Atlee Phillips, had received a letter to go visit them for Christmas, and they would stay with each other and their kids and everything else. Dick Welch went out on the steps to pick up his paper and was machine gunned to death because his name and phone number and address had been outed by that guy, Philip Agee. Others were machine gunned to death all around the world because of Philip Agee. Now, this is at the time when the entire country in this post-Watergate era is turned against the CIA. The KGB is just licking their chops. They're totally happy about this. And Philip Agee, a communist guerrilla who was inside the CIA, wrote a book called Inside the CIA. Others would write other books about it, about the CIA at that time, including including Marchetti and Marx, The Cult of Intelligence. And but nobody did more damage, physical damage, life and death physical damage. And that set the standard for doxing and covering up names in documents because of Philip Agee, because people were killed because of Philip Agee. And he said, in response to them losing their lives, they're big boys. This is what you get if you play this game. He never backed down. This was not any, dude, don't even get me started with Philip Agee, but let me go back to the beginning of David Atlee Phillips, which is the subject of today, which is the craziest story you're ever going to hear in a million years. Because David Atlee Phillips is born on Halloween in Fort Worth in 1922. And his father is a multimillionaire oil guy, Eric, who dies at the age of 5 of Philip. The father dies when he's 5. He has a brother named James Atlee Phillips. David Atlee Phillips, of course, now doesn't have a father at the age of 5, but they have a house right on the middle of the country club in Fort Worth, Texas. Their house is in the middle of the golf course, and there's plenty of money. And the mother sends him to William and Mary College in Maryland. What's that?
William and Mary is here, Williamsburg.
Well, I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm sorry. He sends him to William and Mary. I always think of Maryland because of William and Mary, but he lasts a year, gets kicked out because he's a drunk, and he doesn't show up for the exams of the first year. And he then goes. This is him probably in high school, I would say, in maybe 1939 or something around in there somewhere, right?
Sure.
In 22, he's probably 15, 17 years of age there. But all he wants to be is an actor. So he goes to William and Mary, starts taking acting classes, and then he transfers because he gets kicked out for drunken debauchery. And he goes to Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, where he's back on familiar ground in Fort Worth, Texas. And then World War II. So he enlists in, again, the United States Army Air Force, in case anybody attacks us for using the wrong verbiage. What's that?
Yeah, it was the Army at the time until.
Right, but even as he calls it the Air Force, the vernacular was to call the U.S. Air Force. He calls it that in his own book. But for our people who are fanatically insane, we will say United States Army Air Force, which we've done before with other stories involving LeMay and others. Anyway, he is a nose gunner in a beautiful plane. I don't know if you had a picture of this plane. He is a nose gunner in this gorgeous, gorgeous plane that is doing bombing runs. Look at this job of this B-20, B-24, is it? Yeah.
He was right there.
The B-24 nose gunner is his job right there. That's the Diamond Lil that will later survive the war and be flown around in different air shows and things of that nature. But in a particular, multiple missions over Austria, gets shot down, and he is put into 1944. He's put into a German, like Stalag 17 POW camp, where he joins the escape committee. This is right out of Hogan's Heroes or something. There it is. Yeah, that's the top shot. Look at that beautiful thing. One of the great war machines that we came up with and cranked them off of the assembly line for so many years. Thousands and thousands of them. But he ends up in this POW camp, joins the escape committee, and a French guy like LeBeau out of Hogan's Heroes helps him escape after just 17 days, Eric. And he's out in the woods of Austria, frozen tundra of the Austrian woods, trying to get back to American lines, which he does miraculously with the help of this French guy, LeBeau, who another prisoner who goes back in, brings him clothing and stuff like that. And he gets out of the war and he comes back, and all he wants to be is an actor. So he joins these touring road companies, these theater groups, and he writes a bunch of plays. He's in a play, You Can't Take It With You. He's in a play called Junior Miss, the touring companies, not the ones on Broadway. These are the roadshow productions. And there's a guy named David Merrick. And David Merrick is one of the most, this is This is a revival of it because George C. Scott is in it. James Earl Jones, rather. Elizabeth Ashley. This might have been Morris Hart and Kaufman. It's one of the many revivals. Oh, it's a great cast. Anyway, so he's in a touring company of that. He's in a touring company of Junior Miss. He writes a play, gets optioned by the legendary David Merrick, who pays him money to option this play. He doesn't produce it, but he's paid a stipend to have an option on this play. There's a legendary David Merrick. He'll produce every single major Broadway play, musical, everything, multiple Tonys, going all the way into the 80s. He produced one called 42nd Street, the musical, amazingly enough, and just mega producer. So Merrick options this play and gives him money, and Phillips is divorced already at the age of 21. He meets Helen Hausch, this knockout blonde. Helen Hausch is some stewardess who is unbelievably gorgeous. He meets her, of course, at poolside at the Fort Worth Country Club, where everyone meets, and he marries her immediately. And he says, let's cash in some of my dad's old oil stock and move to Santiago, Chile. So she says, okay, I'm down. It's like 1949, 1950-ish. So they get on a boat. They take this money, and I don't know how much money it is, but they take this boat and money, and they go to Chile, Santiago, Chile, and he buys a British newspaper that's on the balls of its ass called the South. It's called the South something Mail. I don't know if you have a picture of one of the covers there. It was like one of the oldest papers in England. It's called the South Pacific Mail. It was a British paper, but it covered news in South America for 100 years or something. However, in 1950, it's bought by David Atlee Phillips, and he buys some old presses too with the money, because this must have cost a fortune. And he begins to set up the newspaper business there. He also buys a liquor store, Sandy Mac's Liquor, because he is an alcoholic. So why not buy a liquor store, which would be really helpful. He goes to the University of Chile, where he writes plays and joins a local theater group once again. He's contacted by a guy, 1950 CIA guy, and says, would you like to work for us as a contact agent? And he says, what do I have to do? He says, nothing. We'll teach you how to do it. You know, you'll meet guys. This is the greatest cover you can have, the theater. Oh yeah, here's a copy of it. This is an earlier edition, obviously, the 1937, but this is the newspaper that he buys. And it's a great cover for a CIA guy. CIA will use this cover, and there's some of them we commented on in other episodes. They will use this newspaper bullshit cover story all around the world for different guys. There's a guy in Mexico, I forget where it was. His wife wrote the story about the African-American women who helped the space program with John Glenn, getting him into
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yeah. He owned a newspaper, I believe, also in Central America, and his wife wrote that script, completely made up cock and bull story. However, that being said, the CIA loves to have this cover, and he speaks fluent Spanish because of Texas and some other areas where he's been exposed to Spanish. So it's extremely helpful to the CIA that he could do this. Now, what's his job? His job is to turn agents or turn regular people into spies. He says
that's
right. That's their whole job. He says that's his job, is to just, be an intelligence officer. And he delineates this in many of his books, including the Night Watch. He says, my job is to turn people into spies to get information that I can't get. And
ironically, those are the agents. A lot of people get confused.
Right. That's why
are officers, and the informants that they flip, those are the agents.
Well, he says that he calls them spies. He was upset with the House Committee on Assassinations because they derogatorily, according to him, called him a spy. He said, the spies were people who worked for me. Yeah, he was pretty emphatic. What?
Yeah, he ran spies.
Yeah, I ran spies. He was pretty emphatic about it. So he's down there running these people in Chile in 1950 to 1954, and exposing, whatever communist activity is going on. And then he is asked to go to Guatemala. And in Guatemala, summer 1954, he hooks up with a guy named E. Howard Hunt, who may be in a couple of previous episodes. They become great friends. Why do they become great friends? Hunt is a writer. This guy's an actor. He's also kind of a writer, but he's got a brother named James Atlee Phillips, who is the equivalent. Here's a picture of Hunt testifying. There's a guy named James Atlee Phillips who will come into play in this story. James Atlee Phillips writes dozens and dozens of novels, spy novels, with one character named Gall in his spy novels. And that's his brother, James Atlee Phillips. So James Atlee Phillips will also write the movie Thunder Road with Robert Mitchum. Thunder Road will then become a Bruce Springsteen song, not based on the movie, but simply because Springsteen saw the movie poster in a movie theater and it said Thunder Road. He liked the title. That's a side story, but nevertheless, that's the history of Thunder Road. But Robert Mitchum stars in Thunder Road, and that's written by David Atlee Phillips' brother. So there is a family connection of these wealthy kids who always want to get into show business. And the bulk of show business, even now, it's people who have safety nets. When I say safety nets, I mean trust funds. And that's what these people had then, and that's what they have now. So he wants to be an actor, and he's not giving up. He actually was in one movie, some indie film, which I don't even know the name of. He mentions it. I think it was shot in South America, where he brags that he beds 3 actresses as a plot in the movie, not in real life. But I don't know the title of the movie, so I was never able to find it. Yeah, this is a Thunder Road poster here. Yeah, Thunder Road with Mitchum is a great movie for anybody who wants to see it. And Mitchum, forget about the Thunder Road song. There is an opening song of this movie written and sung, if I remember correctly, by Robert Mitchum at the beginning of the movie, which opens up with this hot rod car going through the woods somewhere like in North Carolina or something. But anyway, getting back to Guatemala, Arbenz is in Guatemala, and there's Soviet penetration into into Central America. Everything is being Sovietized in Central and South America. So they create this operation called Operation Success, and Guatemala is pretty primitive. And what Phillips does, Phillips moves into the world of propaganda. This is his area of expertise. Arbenz will flee eventually. His wife was a total communist, and she really ran him. That's a side story for another day. That would be on Guatemalan Untold Stories, another channel. So he has this radio station that he creates, and it's really just they listen to radio in Guatemala by ham or shortwave radio, Eric. They don't really have radio stations. Well, this will be for Cuba. This is a number of years later. But in the Guatemalan episode of PB Success, which it was called, he takes these shortwave radios and he begins to broadcast radio shows. That's how they listen to radio, but it happens to be shortwave. So he's in the jungle somewhere, and on that, he creates the Voice of Liberation Radio. And he creates literally phony radio shows, Eric, to completely alter the zeitgeist of the mood of the country. In other words, he creates phony military invasion sound effects. He invents machine gun fire that he puts into the radio shows.
So he studied Orson Welles.
He is Orson Welles. Not did he study Orson Welles. He is fucking Orson Welles, bro. He's doing... Nobody'd ever done this in U.S. intelligence before. So in the span of a week, it literally with I say 350 exiles, a few P-47 fighters with American pilots, they begin an invasion of Guatemala that is completely fictitious. they handpick a guy who is going to be the new president of Guatemala. Some colonel. They just handpicked this colonel. He's waiting in the wings in the jungle, and they tried to scare our Benz into fleeing, and it works. In other words, it was the great. Eisenhower calls them all into the White House afterwards, and he thanks them all personally. He creates a mass illusion of an entire civil war taking place in Guatemala. In other words, and then he puts out things like, it is not that the waters of Lake Adelon have been poisoned. They have not been poisoned. Remember that. Everybody's like, they're poisoned. That was the psyops that he invented.
That's impressive work,
dude. And he did it himself. He did it himself with his friend E. Howard Hunt. And that's how these two cats made their major bones. So he gets promoted, and he's brought in to the White House. And Eisenhower says, how many men died in this massive thing? And he said, one guy, a messenger, who had a heart attack. So they lost 0 lives. They forced out a Marxist-leaning Arbenz out of Guatemala and installed a guy that they wanted to install. And this became the model for the Bay of Pigs and other topplings of other governments. And that's why Guatemala is so important, Eric, because he is now brought in by Bissell to take over the Cuban psyops out of Miami and begin to work on Cuba. This is him and Dulles. He got a bunch of awards. Dulles, by the way, one thing that Phillips says about Dulles is how Dulles secretly made his bones was in Operation Valkyrie and the assassination of Hitler, which he was involved in the planning. He helped one of the plotters escape to Switzerland after it fell apart. So Dulles is not without credentials to where he later ends up. He's kind of revered by everyone there. But they bring in Phillips for Cuba. And he says this is not going to be a 1 to 3 week operation like it was in Guatemala. He says the Cubans are far more sophisticated. They actually have radio, they have TV, they listen to American radio, American TV, and he says this is going to take 6 months to a year. And they said, all right, well, let's get on with it. And they go, whatever your budget is, goes to Miami. They start, JM Wave, and he brings in, if you could show that radio thing, I'm going to show you again what he brings in. That is a 50 kilowatt radio transmission machine that Eric just showed. And this is one from 1940. He has this brought in from Berlin, where it's being used by the Voice of America. Look at the size of this thing. He brings it in 3 train boxcars. Then I guess it's flown across the Atlantic. And he brings it to a tiny little island off the coast of Honduras called Swan Island. There's nothing on Swan Island, just some lizards and shells. And he contacts a general at the Pentagon and says, can we bring this thing there? And the general says, I'll have the boys build you a dock as soon as possible. And he sends in the Army Corps of Engineers, this general in the Pentagon, builds a dock literally overnight. And they set up this Swan Island operation to be the voice of liberation in their attempt to soften up the Cubans for a military invasion. Now, keep in mind, Nixon's involved in this, Eisenhower's involved in this. The initial plan is to take out Castro before the invasion. Everything goes haywire, of course, when they change administrations, but the planning took a long time. And it wasn't like Guatemala, where it was done overnight. And it took so long that Nixon lost the election. They thought Nixon was going to win. There was some, obviously some alleged stealing of an election in 1960. Nixon might have won that election. We'll never know what happened there in Chicago, Illinois, and another state. Maybe it wasn't really JFK that won that election, Eric, right?
Maybe it's definitely.
There's little tiny Swan Island. It's not even an island. It's like a pile of rocks over there.
And then
And
there's Cuba.
okay, so humorously enough, a bunch of kids show up because why do these kids show up? These college kids land on the island for spring break from Honduras because Honduras owns the island. And we go, what are you guys doing here? And they go, well, we're drinking. What do you mean, what are we doing here? And they go, can you get off the island? They said, no, it's our island. We will later officially give it back to Honduras years later. But we both claimed ownership of Swan Island, just for historical sakes, for anybody who is a stickler for actual accuracy. But anyway, so Phillips and the others begin broadcasting, and it leads to eventually the Bay of Pigs, which he goes into great detail about what went wrong in the Bay of Pigs. And as many, we don't have to get into the entire Bay of Pigs because that could take hours. But really, these people who were kind of doves in the JFK administration, including Dean Rusk and Adlai Stevenson, begin to get his ear. He calls off the air support, as many people know. And maybe, does he explain it here or something? Or
He's talking about Bay of Pigs.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, good.
When the Bay of Pigs failed, I was sitting in the building on that night. Everyone knew it was a failure. And Robert Kennedy came in his shirt sleeves, and he had been sent there by his brother to clean that place out. He wanted to find out what had gone wrong and do something about it. The result, however, was that Bobby Kennedy fell in love with the concept of clandestine operations. And we now know there is one question that's not been answered. Did President Kennedy and did Bobby Kennedy know that there were assassination plans against Fidel Castro? It's an unanswered question. The one thing that I'm absolutely sure of is that not only they knew, but they wished for the continuance of that long period after the Bay of Pigs, in which there were many actions taken against Cuba. To put it precisely, there was at one point when Bobby Kennedy said, when are you fellows going to get off your bottom and do something about Fidel Castro?
Well, he actually said, I swear to God, the actual quote is, when are you going to get off your fat asses and do something about, I swear to God, he didn't say it there, but that's the actual quote from RFK. And then they have plausible deniability, and he didn't do it, and blah, blah, blah. The point of the matter was the Nixon plan, the Eisenhower plan, was a full-scale military invasion. Just take them out. I mean, all of this stuff leads to eventually Castro being cemented in there, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we get away by the skin of our teeth. None of this was necessary. All they had to do was send in 20,000 guys, and this would have been done. And that's what the original plan was, and they moved the landing spot from the mountains to this Bay of Pigs beach. And he's involved in all this. He's ripping his hair out, Phillips, as are other members of the CIA, saying, what is going on with this plan? A bunch of different things go wrong, and the air support is not there. These guys end up being killed, and there's thousands of hostages that are turned back over, POWs essentially, traded for money and military aid, very low key. Nobody really talks about it. JFK months later would trade money and pharmaceutical aid to Cuba for the men. And then later on with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we know what that was about. But the reality of it is, you can compare this to 1965, where, again, David Atlee Phillips is involved in the Dominican Republic. In 1965, Bosch is overthrown, and there's fighting in the streets of Santo Domingo. And there's fighting in the streets of the Dominican Republic. And this goes on for weeks. And he's down there in the embassy because he's the station chief of the CIA in the Dominican Republic. And LBJ does not confer with anybody. He sends in 20,000 troops and ends it. And that was the end of communism in the Dominican Republic. That's all the same thing that LBJ does in DR could have been done in Cuba. I mean, it's astounding that LBJ doesn't confer with peaceniks or anybody else. He literally sends in the Marines and ends this communist uprising, but that happens in 1965. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, because in 1962, David Atlee Phillips is like the second or third in command of Mexico City. And Mexico City is the Casablanca of the 50s and 60s, the post-World War II era in spying in the world. It is literally Casablanca. Every nation has an embassy. The Soviets are in there. You can go to Cuba, to Mexico City, back and forth all day on multiple flights. You could sneak into Texas from Mexico City. You can go to South America. It's just a complete spy haven in Mexico City. And we have some of the greatest state-of-the-art equipment ever invented to spy on both the Soviet embassies, the Cuban embassies, other embassies, everybody spying on everybody. In fact, the money that is, if you look at the budgets from back then, the biggest amount of money is being spent on Mexico City. They put in VLS-2 trigger cameras, which are cameras that are pulse cameras, Eric, that perceive changes of light and automatically take photos. I mean, this was all revolutionary then, you know, in 1962-ish, because nobody had this advanced stuff. Phillips will say the best bugging people in the world electronically were the Soviets. They were light years ahead of us electronically. We were still trying to put bugs into armchairs with batteries that lasted 2 weeks and have to replace. I mean, we really were far behind. The Soviets were putting bugs into the U.S. seal of an embassy in Berlin. You know, I mean, into the United States.
Keep in mind that they were experts by bugging their own people,
including Oswald, Oswald's apartment.
I mean, the Soviets bugged everybody, so they had a ton of experience.
Oh yeah,
we were limited. We only just did COINTELPRO and Chaos. You know, we were tapered down a little.
Well,
bit.
he had, and just a side note, in his apartment in Minsk, they had a camera that was so advanced, this microscopic camera that moved on a metallic snake-like, you know, bendable metal, Eric, that went through the walls of his apartment and was able to film him having sex, bathing, arguing with his wife, whatever. Not just the wiretaps. They had advanced visuals of what Oswald was doing in that apartment in Minsk. They were way ahead of us in that area. Wow. But anyway, so 1962, he hates JFK's guts for letting his men die on the beach. Now, I know this is kind of shocking to people, but he was a Democratic liberal, this guy who voted for McGovern and voted for Humphrey, that being David Atlee Phillips out of Texas. He came out of that blue Texas that was run by LBJ and John Connally back in the day. This was a guy who was a Democrat. And I think this is going to come into play into my overall theory about how LBJ got away with this crime. Because I think there were like-minded people like him and David Atlee Phillips who, despite being Democrats, needed to take out JFK and blame it on the right wing, blame it on Cuba, blame it on the Soviets, blame it on Oswald, blame it on the Republicans, blame it on the Minutemen, or whatever you want to do. I think that Thomas Mann, and I don't know if you have a picture of Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann was the ambassador to Mexico. He is a famously LBJ connected guy who gets the ambassadorship to fucking Mexico. How he gets it, I have no idea. After the assassination, LBJ removes him, puts him in the State Department. Job well done. He will be dealing with the FBI after the assassination as his LBJ crony. I didn't know this. I just recently found this out about Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann is a guy that we're going to have to do a deep dive on at some point because he's a guy that part of this Texas connection, Eric, that we now know a lot more about.
I'm coming up with a German Thomas Mann, so I'm having trouble finding.
No, I sent you a picture of him. He's on Spartacus. I mean, he's a pretty famous guy. He's the ambassador to Mexico. Is a guy who dealt with Tommy Cochran in the, if I remember, in the Truman administration. He got his job through Tommy Cochran. But anyway, to get back to the story, in 1962, who shows up in Mexico City for a gala event? JFK with his gorgeous wife in Mexico City. And who's on the reception line, Eric? David Atlee Phillips. And this guy is being followed around, this guy meaning JFK, inside of this gala ball. He's being followed around by the press that's snapping pictures and interviewing him. And he's going up to hot women and different people saying, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy," and shaking their hands and introducing himself to them. One of them turns out to be the smoking hot wife of David Atlee Phillips, who he immediately makes a beeline to and introduces himself to her, which she comments on in the memoir, that she wore the hottest outfit she could possibly find and was very effective. So David Atlee Phillips shakes his hand and he says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is David Atlee Phillips." And he says, "What do you do here?" He says, "I work for you in the embassy." David Atlee Phillips doesn't know what to say. He goes, "Doing what?" He says, "Well, I write reports." And now Kennedy's getting frustrated because he wants to know what the guy does, Eric. And he says, "What kind of reports?" And he says, "Political reports." I don't know who
That's
this
Thomas
is.
Mann, if folks wanted to know.
You may want to check that a little later. But anyway,
Okay, it is Spartacus.
right. You may want to check that. Anyway, so he shakes Kennedy's hand and he keeps grilling him, Eric, about what he does for a living in the embassy. And he just keeps dragging it out, Phillips, because what is he supposed to say? "I work for the CIA." He's surrounded by press taking photos of him and JFK. And he says, "I file political reports. I write reports." And finally, he sees the light come on in JFK's eyes. And JFK, without words, whispers the words, "I'm so sorry." And he says, "Keep up the good work." And he walks away. And he almost, made an incredibly uncomfortable situation even worse, by he kept grilling him. "What do you do there, bro? You work for me, but what do you actually do?" Anyway, this is a guy whose guts he hates. But that being said, he votes for McGovern and he votes for Hubert Humphrey. So go figure that out. But anyway, so the assassination happens in November of '63. And as soon as it happens, the day afterwards, he has lunch, he meaning David Atlee Phillips, with a guy from U.S. News and World Report down there in Mexico City. And he tells this guy, this journalist who he knows, he has lunch with him. He's a friend of his. He tells this guy, "By the way, Oswald visited the embassy he tells this random press guy, "Oswald visited the embassy in October. And thank God we covered our ass and sent the information to headquarters." Guy goes, "That's interesting." So of course now the story spreads among them, and the Warren Commission wants to know what's happening. There's a guy named FBI agent Marvin Giesling. Now Marvin Giesling is an interesting guy because he's the one that puts Oswald on the FBI watch list in 1959. When he is a defector. He will, on October 8th, 1963, for reasons that have never been explained, removes Lee Harvey Oswald from that watch list, thereby taking him off the security list for Dallas and not having him checked by the Secret Service. Nobody knows why. Nobody ever interviewed Giesling. Everyone involved in this caper is demoted by Hoover. At the FBI, and Hoover quietly demotes all these different people involved with Mexico City. He sends a guy down there immediately after the assassination. There's Thomas Mann is sent to the State Department. This is an reward by LBJ after Mexico City, because when the FBI comes down to Mexico City, Thomas Mann just confronts them and says, "Castro did this." And the FBI says, "We're going in another direction on this." And Mann is emphatic that the Soviets did this and that Oswald did this with Castro and Soviet complicity. And what the FBI tells him, and which he won't accept, is that LBJ, his mentor, and Hoover have decided we're going in another direction. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Meaning the lone nut. Katzenbach, of course, the Deputy Attorney General, famously puts out the Katzenbach memo saying we must convince the American people that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. He sends this to Bill Moyers. They're all kind of in on this memo. We've discussed the Che Guevara memo and conversation with LBJ, talking about the fact that there's an imposter down in Mexico City. Hoover had been duped by the CIA before. He talks about the situation with French, something to do with the French a number of years before with the CIA, and also with Mexico City. So getting into Oswald in Mexico City, what the people involved in the conspiracy would like you to believe is that he gets on a bus in New Orleans, and I'll just explain their storyline. He gets onto a bus in New Orleans with a CIA agent, unbeknownst to him, William Godot, spying on him. They say that Oswald, the quiet Oswald, went up and down the bus telling people he'd been in the Soviet Union and he's going to Mexico City to get a visa. No, these people on the bus were interviewed that the guy said that he was Oswald, just random. There was an old couple on vacation or retired. There was 3 or 4 hot girls from Australia. He went up to everybody on the bus telling them who he was. Don't ever forget I was on this bus.
Sounds like General Walker on the plane.
Yeah, on the Braniff flight out of Shreveport. So he lets them know in no uncertain terms that he was on this bus. And he gets to Mexico City and he checks into the Commercio Hotel. I don't know if you have a picture of that, the outside of the Commercio. Apparently, though, there's no signature for him signing. So the desk clerk says, "Oh, I always sign for everybody. There's no point in letting them sign. I sign. Why should somebody sign?" This is probably from the 70s, this photo. But he checks into this hotel, the quote unquote Oswald, and then makes a beeline for the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy, where he visits, goes there 3-4 times. And this is the gate, what Eric is showing you here. This is the gate to the Cuban consulate. He goes in there and he meets Sylvia Duran, this smoking hot little girl who is Mexican. And he says, "I want a visa to Havana and then to go on to Moscow." And she said, "Well, I can't do that. You got to get it from the Soviets. Let me call them." She calls up the Soviets, and they're right next door. There's the mugshot of Sylvia Duran. She will be tortured by Mexican intelligence at our request because she would not cooperate in this crazy storyline. She said, "I don't know anything about this. This guy came in. He didn't look anything like the guy you're telling me." And in fact, we have that famous photo of the guy that they claim is Oswald, Eric. And the situation is they've got these cameras everywhere. They got these phones tapped everywhere. And they claim that Oswald went in and met with Kostikov. Now, who's Kostikov? There's a guy named Kostikov who is a KGB agent within the Soviet embassy. And Valery Kostikov is supposedly meeting with Oswald to arrange the assassination of JFK. Now, keep in mind, this is September 27th, 28th, October 1st. Oswald is in Mexico City for 6 days. There's a picture of Kostikov with his prized Volkswagen Beetle. And he is the KGB representative in the Soviet embassy there. So they claim that Oswald met with Kostikov and planned to do some assassination stuff. Okay, so they tell this to the Warren Commission. How does the Warren Commission know that Oswald was even there? They know that because a guy named David Atlee Phillips tells them so 2 days after the assassination, when they begin to form this Warren Commission team. And what does LBJ do? He uses the same information to scare the shit out of Richard Russell, scare the shit out of Earl Warren, that we are looking at World War III, boys. We're talking about 80 million people going up in a cloud of dust in about a minute and a half. And Earl Warren goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President." And he says, "And I need your help because we cannot let this story proceed any further, Mr. Warren." And Earl Warren says, I'll do whatever I can. And he browbeats Earl Warren into being the head of the Warren Commission. This was designed by LBJ to avoid multiple Luna type congressional task forces that were being formed at the time. The last thing LBJ wanted was multiple Luna commissions raising all kinds of messy questions. He wants to put together one commission that he can control, and that's the Warren Commission. He will then handpick the men who are on that commission, which is what happens. So they don't want this information of the phony Oswald, real Oswald, any Oswald in Mexico City coming out because it's hard to explain. Why would Oswald, a lone nut, be in Mexico City September 27th and September 28th, Eric, and October 1st, getting paid to assassinate JFK? A, they didn't stop it. B, he's no longer a lone nut. C, we're now looking at thermonuclear war. And D, LBJ is now, in theoretical terms, fighting off pressure to invade the island of Cuba, which is the whole point of this phony Oswald trying to get a visa to Havana, was to start up Bay of Pigs 2, hold the Soviets at bay, saying, look, we know you killed our president, you scumbags. We know Castro is involved. We're taking him out, and you better not do anything. And LBJ said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to all of a sudden get into a shooting war with Cuba and the Soviets. I just got here. I got plenty of liquor to drink and plenty of girls to fuck. I ain't doing it. And that was the quid pro quo. The double quid pro quo he gives him 2 days later is Vietnam. And he says, you want your war, here's your goddamn war. And he signs National Security Action Memo 273, reversing National Security Action Memo 263, signed by JFK the month before. And the Vietnam War essentially has begun. And the generals go, grump, 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 grump. All right, at least we got a war, boys. Let's go. And they go off with Bell Helicopter, and others make a fortune. Brown and Root, who were LBJ's benefactors, they make a fortune. It's LBJ's war, as I once explained to Richard Lewis, who thought it was Nixon's war. I said, I don't remember kids chanting, hey, hey, Nixon, how many kids did you kill today? It was, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? It was LBJ's war. And they hung it around his neck because it was a quid pro quo for him to become president. We got into a little bit with Paul last week about the idea that the bulk of these people, and I may have to get into this another time, the bulk of the people who are JFK researchers are far left Democratic people. The idea that LBJ was involved is the furthest thing from their minds. Every single one of them, starting with Philip Agee and trickling down, were all leftist, progressive Marxists. And I mean that, and I've met them all. And, you know, some of them don't care about politics. Some of them are so far left, it would drive you insane. And they will not look at LBJ. It is just incomprehensible. But that's the brilliance of the plan that LBJ put together. It's the brilliance of the strategy that he created. Because he gave away the store in the next few years with every single program that could ever be imagined, that were not imagined by him. They were imagined by another Philip, who was the publisher of the Washington Post, Philip Graham, who was his personal advisor. Phil Graham, who will later do something with his head and a gun when he gets out of a mental institution, is the guy who comes up with the idea for the Great Society. He's the one that convinces LBJ to give away every single thing that's not nailed down. LBJ didn't want to do this. He was conservative financially, and it was anathema to him. Phil Graham of the Washington Post convinces him to create something that Phil Graham invents called the Great Society, including the phrase. Phil Graham will eventually go insane, and he will take his own life. But that's a story for another day. And his wife will end up running the paper, which is another story for another day, if you want to see that movie called The Post. But anyway, so what happens with David Atlee Phillips? Now, David Atlee Phillips goes to the Dominican Republic And after the Dominican Republic, it was so successful that he's called into this guy's office. And I want to say that it was 1967. He's called into this office and he goes in there. And this guy, August of 1967, yeah, he goes into the Oval Office. Who does he meet? His benefactor, LBJ, Eric. And LBJ says, "What a great job you did." And he's now thanking David Atlee Phillips for the Dominican operation. And he says, "Son, would you like a Dr. Pepper?" And because they're both from Texas. And David Atlee Phillips said, "I hadn't had a Dr. Pepper in 20 years because he's been overseas." And LBJ knew that the two of them could bond over a Dr. Pepper. Ingenious.
For sure.
And LBJ says to him, "I want to thank you personally for handling the FBI for me down there and in the Dominican and in Mexico." The guy who was in charge was Juan Bosch in the Dominican, and there was a coup against him, which led to a civil war. And he becomes 1965 to 67. Phillips becomes a GS-15, Eric. He will later go even higher than GS-15.
I think he got all the way to 18.
Yeah, he got to the tippy top. Oh, yeah. He retired at 18. I mean, there is no other thing, right? Next thing you need a confirmation from the
Correct.
Senate.
There's nothing higher. He would have been director of the CIA.
He was making the equivalent at the end in today's money, $250,000 a year, which is not chump change. And he, at one point, he becomes a public speaker, and he gets an agent in New York. This is in the 60s. He gets an agent in New York and becomes a public speaker. He moves to Rio de Janeiro. He gets assigned to Rio de Janeiro, to Brazil, and goes into a cafe one night. And he's in this little cafe, and he's doing the same thing. He's trying to, this is this is later, but this is 77. But he was doing this in 67. And he's in a cafe in Rio. And who comes in with a bunch of men? Che Guevara. And he sits down and has a long conversation with Che Guevara. And it will not end well for Che Guevara. But Phillips said that the Bolivian police, who were tipped off by a peasant woman in the village who killed Che Guevara, that Phillips begged them to spare his life. And it wasn't for being nice. He said there was two reasons. One was to get information out of him, because he was a fortress of information. And two was to avoid making him a martyr. And the Bolivians said, "Thank you very much." And they put him up and they shot him in a firing squad 2 minutes later. And then Rodriguez or somebody cut his hands off and shipped him back to the United States. But the reality of it was that he didn't have any love for Che Guevara. But he does say in his book just how charismatic Che Guevara was. But he spoke fluent Spanish, Phillips, so he was able to have, in-depth conversation with him. When he goes to Rio, I think it's 1970, 1972, he gets promoted to a G-17. So he's moving up the ladder there, Eric, right?
Sure. I mean, there's not much above.
There's not much above, but it's funny because he's in and out of his new headquarters, which is in Langley, and Dulles is fired, Bissell's fired, Cabell is fired, and
Colby at the end. Or?
Colby's at the end. Yeah, Colby
Okay.
changes the entire structure, and I mean atmosphere of the CIA. He lets them grow their hair long. He does away with the dress code. He lets gays come in. They always had women. Phillips said a third of the force was women anyway. But Colby completely changes the culture of the CIA, and it's never really rebounded since then from what Colby did. I mean, they liked Helms. Helms was a company man. Dulles they revered, but Colby not so much.
Didn't Colby also reveal like half of what they were
the
doing?
family jewels?
Yeah. So it's kind of like Colby was kind of a leftist,
gave,
wasn't he?
He was
himself?
a deeply Catholic, religious man, and he was haunted by all kinds of morality issues. The one thing these guys didn't have was morality issues. You know, any of these guys. It's not the spot to be in if you're troubled by Catholicism like Colby was. And Angleton is also in the building, and nobody even knows what Angleton looks like. At one point, he's in there eating lunch, Phillips, and he says, "Is that Angleton?" And the guy says, "I don't know. I've never seen him myself." These are the CIA guys who don't know what Angleton looks like. Never seen him. So it's kind of interesting, but they start to investigate. They start to investigate through the House Assassinations Committee and these different committees. There's Harvey and there's Angleton on the left and there's Phillips on the right. The two guys on the left will be drummed out of the Corps, and Phillips will stay on for many years after both of those guys are long gone.
Now, those two guys on the left came through OSS. Phillips,
yeah, they were
right after, right?
Yeah, but they're also Harvey gets sent to Rome. He's an alcoholic, and Angleton is all three are alcoholics. I mean,
well, there you
go. There's no doubt about that. That's by their own admission. In 1968, he comes back to Washington, and his 19-year marriage with the 4 kids that he has is collapsed because they can't really be a couple. He explains it in detail. This is the family. They always have the one long-haired boy. I'll tell you this now. I was going to save this for the end. They live in Bethesda, Maryland, right? And those kids play with the kids across the street, especially the long-haired kid and the girls. And they play with the neighbors, Eric, in Bethesda, Maryland. So who lives across the street from them directly? You're never going to believe this, so I'm just going to tell you. Mark Halpern. He plays with those children. His father, Morton Halpern, lives across the street from David Atlee Phillips. You want to talk about small world?
I was wondering because I found this shot and I was going to share it with you. This is Sam Halpern.
Sam Halpern is not related to them. That's a different Halpern.
Oh, okay. Just a weird coincidence.
Yeah, that's a different spelling too, I think. But there is that guy, right? But it's not the same family.
Okay.
Now, getting back to the investigation into the Oswald in Mexico thing, which I've said many times is the Achilles heel of the JFK plot. Everything about Mexico City is so dangerous to the CIA and so dangerous. There's 2 third rails of the JFK assassination. The phony attacks on the Zapruder film and trying to convince people the most damaging thing to the CIA is the Zapruder film. The second most damaging thing is Mexico City, because they were caught red-handed with an imposter Oswald photographed and an imposter Oswald on the phone, who introduces himself on the phone as Lee Henry Oswald. Just keep that in mind. To the Soviet embassy, when he calls on the phone the first time, he thinks his middle name is Henry, just so you think it's, in case you might think it was Oswald himself. I don't believe Oswald was ever in Mexico City. They have no photographs of him. Wynn Scott, who was the head of station there at the time, there's no photos anywhere of Oswald. There's nobody following Oswald. They create, after the Warren Commission comes out, they create a legacy that Oswald was at a twist party with 2 beatniks. They begin to try to create a legend to show that he was there. And none of it holds up. All of it is laughable. And the idea that he was in Mexico City and they weren't following him and taking photos of him. And as what's his name? I think it was Lee Rankin from the Warren Commission said something to the effect, they have no evidence of him ever being in Mexico. So I'm trying to find this quote by Lee Rankin. My friend, anyway, Lee Rankin said they have no evidence of him ever being in Mexico City. They don't have a piece of paper. Oh, they have no record of Oswald's daily movements while in Mexico City, nor could they confirm the date of his departure or his mode of travels. This is from Lee Rankin, one of the lawyers for the Warren Commission. So what do? And this is something you're never going to believe. When they confront Marina Oswald after the assassination, she says, my husband was never in Mexico City. And they pressure her to say that he was. However, there's no souvenirs, there's no sombrero, there's no piñata, there's nothing. There's no evidence. The Warren Commission calls up in September of 1964 to the FBI and the CIA. Now, keep in mind, every single item belonging to Marina Oswald has been searched. She lives in a motel room, for Christ's sakes, guarded by the Secret Service and the FBI, Eric. All of her stuff has been gone through repeatedly. No one is allowed to go in and talk to Marina Oswald. That includes Robert Oswald. That includes Marguerite Oswald. No relatives can go in. No media can go in. No anybody can go in there. She tries to get Mark Lane as a lawyer, Eric, which I didn't know, and they won't let her call Mark Lane. Nobody is allowed to talk to her. She is persona non grata. She is completely off the radar and in control of our state police, of our federal police forces. Completely illegal, and they're threatening her that if she doesn't cooperate, the children will be taken from her and raised by the state, and she'll be deported back to the Soviet Union. It's constantly browbeaten into her head. She says, but he wasn't in Mexico City, Eric. And she says, I don't know what to tell you about that. All of a sudden, a woman shows up at the door of the motel room. Who is the woman, Eric? Well, it's the old Priscilla Johnson McMillan. Hey, how are you doing? How's everything? And she shows up. What does she have in her hand? She's got a Spanish TV guide from the week of the trip to Mexico City. And inside of the TV guide are 2 Mexican bus tickets. And they're supposedly the return tickets that Oswald took when he left Mexico City to go to Dallas. How convenient. This is 2 days before the Warren Commission is about to go to press in September 1964. Now, keep in mind, we're supposed to believe that this was under Marina's possession for over a year in this motel room, that the FBI has searched every single paper she's ever held. But now, on this date in history, after Priscilla McMillan shows up magically with a magazine that's never been in this room, a Spanish TV guide, it magically has 2 Mexican bus tickets in it. Well, that's a great day for the Warren Commission, because now they could safely say, we've got bus tickets. Oswald returning from Mexico City. They had to do this. They had to get McMillan into the mix because there was no evidence of him being in Mexico City. And the Warren Commission kept saying, we're going to press. You know, what do you got for this storyline? They had 6 FBI agents listen to the tapes. Now, the storyline for the CIA is, and this is a storyline of David Atlee Phillips, we destroyed the tapes of Oswald right after we made the recordings. Well, why did you destroy them? It says here in your own bylaws, you don't destroy them for 2 weeks. And he goes, well, in this case, we made a mistake. And they go, all right, come on. And they says, no, it happens. Shit happens. We destroyed them. And they say, well, how do you explain this? And he goes, well, explain what? He says, here are 6 FBI agents who said they listened to the tapes on November 23rd. And he went, oh boy, I'm fucked. And so 6 FBI agents contact J. Edgar Hoover, and that's why Hoover is comfortable telling LBJ, who knows all of this shit anyway. When you listen to LBJ, there's people who listen to LBJ for years on the phone, like I have, know that there's an LBJ who is just like saying stuff that he already knows. And in this conversation with Hoover, he's going, oh, really? That's interesting. Yes. And he already knows it. And you could tell that he's not shocked.
It's like he's talking about like somebody who knows he's being recorded
right,
for the record.
Right. And there's many times when there's real phone calls, you could hear the real LBJ in phone calls many times, you know, about political issues. It's a real guy. But then there's stage phone calls. And this was a stage phone call. However, Hoover is saying to LBJ, we have an imposter because my men have listened to the freaking tapes. And they just interviewed him for 18 consecutive hours. They know his voice. And LBJ goes, oh boy, this is definitely a problem. And they go, what else you got there, J. Edgar? And he says, well, we got a photo of a guy who looks like a linebacker for the St. Louis Cardinals. He goes, what? He says, yeah. And he shows him the famous photo. I don't know if you still have the photo, but he shows him the famous photo of the supposed Oswald, who's 6 foot tall, 195 pounds, muscular, receding hair. That goes out in the cables by Ann Goodpasture. Great name, like the Miss Moneypenny of Bond. Her name is Ann Goodpasture. This is 2 of the photos. Now, keep in mind, they've got these VLS2 cameras that David Atlee Phillips will say, the contradictions are breathtaking, because David Atlee Phillips will say the cameras were not working that day. And they said, okay, that's great, but what about this guy? And he said, the next breath, he said, we went through hundreds and hundreds of photos from that week, and none of them were Oswald. And they said, you just said the cameras were broken. And he went, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry.
Those cameras.
Right.
The other cameras.
Right. And so anyway, there's no photos of Oswald.
Do you think that's why also that LBJ shut the whole thing down and said he's a lone nut, move on?
I think that they knew this was the plan from day one. It was part of his quid pro quo. I don't know if he knew the details of the plan, Eric.
But when they have so many problems with Oswald there, it's like, okay, we just need to wrap this shit up and
oh, no. There's no doubt about it. That's why the Katzenbach memo goes out, and he conspires with Hoover, LBJ and Hoover on how to wrap this up. Now, he doesn't let on to Hoover, and maybe Hoover suspects that LBJ is in on it. As I said last week, there's no way he cannot be in on it. The actions that he takes are insane. The actions that people below him take cannot be carried out. Like I said, if you have these military guys running an autopsy at Bethesda and they're doing things in lightning speed, are they coming up with this on their own? And if you're plotting, let's say the Joint Chiefs of Staff came up with this plot as revenge for the Bay of Pigs, revenge for the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's fine. We're going to not tell LBJ and just hope he goes along with us after the fact, seconds after the fact, and he doesn't come after us. How insane is that to all these people who think LBJ couldn't possibly be involved? All of these plotters, the doctors, the autopsy, the people, the Dallas police, everybody's involved except the one guy who could end your career life and put you in prison and have you executed for killing the head of the United States. I mean,
one guy could ask any question of anybody.
The one guy could ask any question of anybody and have you executed is not going to be brought into the plot. You're just going to throw caution to the wind and go, you know what? I hope LBJ is a good guy and goes along with us. That's fucking insane. I'm sorry. It's about time that we got to LBJ. Stop dancing around with these leftist fucking investigators who, for the life of them, would never look at LBJ in a million years. It's sickening. It really is getting sickening. Their investigations, they can't wait to find a right-wing Cuban who masterminded this entire thing, including the autopsy with admirals. Whoever was the right-wing Cuban was able to get the ear of the admirals in the Bethesda autopsy and tell them how to make the shots look like they came from behind. Give me a fucking break. Anyway, LBJ meets with David Atlee Phillips. Thomas, the guy who we were discussing before, Thomas Mann, is his guy down in Mexico City. He's promoted out of there. He has a daughter, David Atlee Phillips. One of his daughters is 15 years of age. His youngest daughter, she's 15, and they live in Bethesda. And in the summer of 1968, she's driving on a Saturday night with her boyfriend and is hit head on by a truck and killed. And he just spirals out of control, Phillips, and he just got divorced. His wife's an alcoholic. So he ends up with the kids, which is rare, as you know, Eric, in a divorce settlement. He has a Filipino houseboy who is making dinner for them. There's no woman in the mix. There's not even a maid. These kids are kind of like the Hunt kids. Remember when Hunt goes to jail and his kids are running wild? This is a similar situation. Now he's got to go back to Venezuela. He's being investigated. Phillips, you know, because they're starting to start up these different committees. He becomes the, like I said, the GS-17. This is a shot here. Now, this is in the Senate committee. This is Senate Select Committee. Now, the reason I like this photo is for one reason. Phillips was a master actor, and I believe he was also using, which he admitted to, using phony phone calls in other coups d'etats. He used the phone, I believe, as Oswald in Mexico City. I believe that was him. That was one of his tricks that he did. And I believe that he was on the phone in those phone calls, but it's a side issue. The guy to his left, if you go back, this guy right here is Clark Clifford. Clark Clifford is the henchman of LBJ. This is in a Senate testimony. He's not testifying, Clark Clifford, nor is he legally, quote unquote, the lawyer of record for David Atlee Phillips. These other two guys on the extreme right and left are his lawyers. Clark Clifford is there for LBJ. He is another henchman of LBJ who mixes into this storyline. So we've got Thomas Mann, we've got Clark Clifford, you've got David Atlee Phillips, you got a lot of guys out of Texas or are linked to LBJ in the post-assassination investigation era that goes up until the end of his administration, 1968. Into the 70s, you know, it's LBJ controlling it possibly from Austin until his demise in 1973. In 1972, by the way, he gets a new wife. He's got 3 kids now. She's got 3 kids, the new wife, Gia. It's another Brady Bunch. It's another, 8 is enough, or whatever they want to call it. But in 68, he's named chief of Cuban operations for the Western Hemisphere, Phillips. So it's pretty big, but there's a problem. There's a guy named Antonio Veciana, and Antonio Veciana was a bank accountant in Havana. Antonio Veciana is in charge of the most violent Cuban group, anti-Castro group called Alpha 66. The guy on the left, Antonio Veciana, who used to be an accountant, becomes a crazy guy. He says that his handler in Dallas and his handler in the United States, in Miami through JM Wave, was a guy named Maurice Bishop. And Maurice Bishop was a pseudonym or a cover name for David Atlee Phillips, one of many, but Veciana does not want to give Phillips up because they have a very strong relationship, but he's teasing the assassination committee, saying, I need to talk to him to see if it's really him. And they set up a meeting with the two of them, and they study them while they're meeting. And he says, no, it's not him, but it is him. And he doesn't want to give him up. He doesn't want to say that he's Maurice Bishop. There's a guy named John McCone, who is the head of the CIA, and he testifies simply, was there ever a Maurice Bishop in the CIA? And McCone says yes, stupidly, completely undermining Phillips's bullshit story that there was no Maurice Bishop. Is this McCone?
Yeah.
Yeah. So McCone is an outsider who's an industrialist who's brought in to run the CIA by the Kennedys and people after him. He doesn't really fit in, and they keep him in the closet about almost everything. But the reality of it is Robert Tannenbaum, who was the original investigator with Richard Sprague. This is the artist conception. You tell me if Maurice Bishop on the left looks anything like David Atlee Phillips on the right. Phillips will deny that he. What's that?
Here's 2 options. So here's another.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could look at it, and in fact, the reason that Veciano is important is that he claims that he met David Atlee Phillips in the lobby of an office building in Dallas in November before the assassination with Oswald. It links the CIA directly to Oswald pre-assassination. It links David Atlee Phillips to Lee Harvey Oswald. It links the CIA to the assassination. It is a troublesome factoid of Veciano making these statements. Veciano will recant and say it's not him. There's too many people saying it is him. You can safely say that he was Maurice Bishop. Whether he met with Veciana and Oswald is debatable. It sounded, when you hear Veciano's testimony, it sounds a little strange. Like, why is he walking in there with Oswald? He has nothing to do with the meeting. But anyway, that's what Veciano says. Veciano will later receive, I think in 1973, a major payout by the CIA to go away. And he does go away with like a $500,000 or $340,000 payment. And Phillips says, this is for all your good work over the years. And Veciana says, all right, I'll take it. And he ends up, where does he end up working? USAID. Veciana, the Cuban accountant, head of the right wing, supposedly right wing, ultra crazy group, Alpha 66, ends up working for USAID in South America at the Bank of Bolivia. So they take care of their own, Eric.
Wow. Of course he does. That
Well,
brings us
in
to Phil
76
Agee, because Phil Agee is one of the first ones who revealed USAID.
Yeah. He wants to reveal everything. He believes if you get killed, it's on you. And tough break, you shouldn't have been there anyway. So then what happened? So remember, we covered with Mark Lane. By the way, in 1964, November 16th, guess who flies to Mexico City and interviews Win Scott? Win Scott being the station chief. He's the guy above David Atlee Phillips. Win Scott believes the Soviets did this, and he dies of a heart attack. But before he dies of a heart attack, here's Win Scott, the subject of Jefferson Morley's book, Our Man in Mexico. His son will become a movie director, but he only directs Hallmark Hall of Fame TV movies, sadly. Michael Scott. Anyway, the guy goes down there November 16th, 1964, to find out from Win Scott any information they could about the assassination. And that guy is Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. So anyone who thinks that Kennedy was not involved in researching his brother's demise is crazy. He will later say in 1968, only the powers of the presidency will allow me to find out the true murderers of my brother, and he will be dead within 60 days himself. So he was behind the scenes. According to RFK Jr., he had all the wiretaps. He had wiretaps that were previously in place against the mob. He had wiretaps of Jack Ruby talking to all these different mobsters for months, his father. And Robert Tannenbaum, who was the top prosecutor in New York City, he's one of the original investigators with Richard Sprague out of Philly on the House Assassinations Committee. They will both be forced to resign because they are the real deal. They will be replaced by Robert Blakely, who is a stooge. He will cock block the entire investigation. But at the beginning, it was a real committee with real people. Tannenbaum interviewed Phillips and called him a professional liar. And he interviewed him at length, not under oath, but interrogated him deeply. He showed him a memo they had of the tapes being listened to by the FBI, and he quietly picked up the memo, Phillips, folded it up, put it into his suit jacket, got up and left. When confronted by Robert Tannenbaum, the top investigator of the House Assassinations Committee.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were on to him. That's why Tannenbaum and Richard Sprague, were forced out of the committee because they were told you'd have to sign a confidentiality agreement with the CIA to investigate the CIA. And Sprague said, I can't do that. And Tannenbaum said the same thing, and they resigned in protest. Here's Tannenbaum. He was a former Brooklyn prosecutor, something like 500 convictions and one lost case or something. So he wrote a couple of books afterwards, mostly novels, but the situation with Veciana was really dicey, but not as dicey as the Hunt versus Liberty Lobby case with Mark Lane. Getting back to E. Howard Hunt, Hunt was above him, Eric, in pay grade when they started. He surpasses Hunt, who gets blamed for Watergate and goes to jail and everything else. So Hunt is like persona non grata. However, Hunt is on trial with Mark Lane because of Hunt versus Liberty Lobby and that settlement that we covered in the Mark Lane story. So who does he depose? And this is something that even Grok doesn't have. Who does he depose as one of the witnesses in the case of Hunt versus Liberty Lobby? David Atlee Phillips, because he's a friend of Hunt's. And he says in the deposition, was Hunt in Mexico City on November 22nd, 1963? And he says, no, he wasn't, but he was there.
For Oswald.
No, Hunt.
Hunt.
He says, was E. Howard Hunt in Mexico City on November 22nd? And he says he wasn't there that day, but he was there for the weeks before. And Mark Lane famously says, I guess this guy's not going to be a witness for Hunt on the stand. And he wasn't. And Lane crosses him off his list as a witness because he's just undermined E. Howard Hunt in his deposition. Now, in the deposition, two lawyers show up, CIA lawyers. They identify themselves as such. And, of course, Ron Smith. So he says to Lane, of course, my name is not Ron Smith. I'm just using that name. And Mark Lane says, well, who are you? He says, I can't tell you that. He says, well, what are you doing here? He says, I'm here on behalf of the federal government. He goes, but I'm representing my client here in a case against E. Howard Hunt and the federal government, ostensibly. We usually tell us your name for the record. He says, well, I'm not going to do that. So he's some spook lawyer who they didn't identify at the deposition, which was kind of weird. But he confers with David Atlee Phillips all through the deposition. The deposition goes on. All right, Hunley's gone now. Look, when he comes back in the comments section, just everyone write the same thing. How did it go, Hunley? Everybody in the comment section when he comes back, because he's either going to take number 1 or number 2, and he may not be back for a while. So when he comes back, everyone write, how did it go, Hunley, in the comment section. Okay, he'll miss this part of the story, so it doesn't matter. But I mean, the investigation goes into David Atlee Phillips. But now in 1977, he begins to do a lot of press, David Atlee Phillips. He does Tom Snyder. He does Meet the Press. He does all these different shows trying to defend the CIA. And it's not going well because of people like Philip Agee. So he has to debate Mark Lane. And Mark Lane agrees lovingly, of course, to debate him at USC in 1977. And he studies Lane's psychological profile that the CIA compiled when Lane wrote the book Rush to Judgment. They've got an entire file on him. So he agrees to debate Mark Lane at USC in 1977. And some of this audio, when Eric comes back, we'll play some of the audio of this debate. He deposes, the deposition was 1984, by the way, the second trial of E. Howard Hunt. So not to be confused with the first trial, but the deposition was in 1984. But in 77, he begins to debate Mark Lane and debate some other people about the CIA's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. There's a guy named Ray Klein, who was another deputy director of the CIA, who comes with him, and some of the other people who were there. I was just telling about the debate. Maybe we could play a little bit of the clip of Mark Lane debating David Atlee Phillips, Eric, at USC in 1977.
Sure, we got 2 parts. You know which?
Okay. Well, first, why don't we play David Atlee Phillips' closed-door testimony to the House Assassinations Committee, if you could find that snippet of tape audio that was kind of concealed for many, many years. And then you can...
I've got that one going.
Okay, let me hear that one, because that's we've already covered that part of David Atlee Phillips. This is behind closed doors, by the way. Somebody recorded this. It came to the public just a couple of years ago. So we'll just play a couple of minutes of that.
All right, and I did restore it to get the sound.
Oh, good. Okay.
So.
Anything? Nothing?
You don't hear it?
I don't see it or hear it.
Oh, you should be hearing it. Okay, hold on.
Right.
All right.
Oh, here's something. Go ahead.
To the best of my recollection, there was something indicating in the translation, this guy's speaking terrible Russian.
Oh, just stop it for a second. I just want to set this up. They're asking him about the phone call from Oswald to the Soviet embassy. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem.
My name is Lee Henry Oswald.
He said Henry.
Have you had any word about me, about my visa? I'm not positive. Something along this line. Some sort of indication that he hoped to travel to Cuba with the idea of going on to the Soviet Union. That is my best recollection.
Anything else?
At one point or another, there was something that left me with the impression that he said something like, "You should talk to me," or something like that. I do not recall that he said anything about paying for my trip. I cannot tie that recollection.
Okay, well, we got a good sample. We got a good
Okay.
sample. What he's saying is his entire career, David Atlee Phillips will claim that Oswald went there to be paid by the Soviets, and he sets up a guy named Gilberto Alvarado. I don't know if you have a picture of this guy. He's a Nicaraguan, Eric. Name is Gilberto Alvarado. Now, Alvarado will show up on November 25th. He'll walk in to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. Here's Alvarado. And he will claim that he witnessed a red-headed Negro, his words, paying Oswald inside the Cuban embassy $15,000 to kill Kennedy. He will tell this to David Atlee Phillips, who will then go public with it. Again, keep in mind, Oswald's been dead for 1 day and they're already making these moves. So the move by this guy, Gilberto Alvarado, is to pressure LBJ into invading Cuba, because we now have a witness who's gone public and in the media saying he witnessed Oswald being paid by Cubans. This goes to the attention of Fidel Castro, being paid $15,000 to $20,000 in American money, and talking about the assassination in the Cuban embassy. Now, he touts this, David Atlee Phillips. He amplifies this because he wants the invasion of Cuba. This is his legacy that he is talking about with the Bay of Pigs. He wants this to be finished for his men and for everything that he's worked his entire life to achieve. LBJ does not want to invade the island of Cuba. This guy, it now turns out, is a intelligence agent who's being run by Phillips. And he's forced to reveal this by LBJ to put an end to this Gilberto Alvarado storyline that the Cubans were paying Oswald. And he had to do it damn quickly because LBJ wanted to put the kibosh on this, and Phillips was dragging his feet. And you can imagine how dangerous this storyline is on November 25th, 1963, that a guy witnesses. So he recants. He says, I made it all up. I'm working for Somoza in Nicaragua. I'm an intelligence agent, which was true. But he was also a double agent. He worked for us, worked for the CIA. Now we're still torturing Sylvia Duran. And there's memos to the effect using wording like aggressively question her, physically question her, CIA documents to Mexican intelligence. And a lot of those documents have never been released until recently for obvious reasons. And they tortured the shit out of this little girl until she said whatever they wanted her to say, including I had an affair with Oswald, that I was at a twist party with Oswald. Veciana has a cousin who's in the Mexican intelligence. And Oswald, he's approached by David Atlee Phillips to give money to his cousin to say he was at a party in Mexico City with Lee Harvey Oswald. And they're spreading out because they need to place Oswald in Mexico City, and they can't do it. A couple of gringos who work for the State Department say they had a twist party. These are regular white people who work for us, saying they had a twist party and Oswald was there. Although he didn't do the twist with two beatnik friends, they attempt that storyline that doesn't hold up. So the whole Mexican thing begins to fall apart until people in the 90s and into the 2000s, people like Jefferson Morley put out books saying that Oswald was in Mexico City. Ask Robert Groden if Oswald was in Mexico City. He's got an entire chapter about what I just said to you in his book, in one of his coffee table books about Lee Harvey Oswald not being in Mexico City, and possibly, we believe, in Florida at the time with some mob guys who were trying to help with some anti-Castro activity. And one of them was a wire man down in Miami. He also visits Sylvia Odio with Angel and Leopoldo, two members of the anti-Castro Cuban Alpha 66 group. That's in Dallas, September 25th. Sylvia Odio will testify that they showed up with Lee Harvey Oswald, going by the name Leon Oswald. This is Sylvia Odio, came from a very wealthy Cuban family, moved to Dallas, set up an anti-Castro social organization against Castro in Dallas. She claims that Oswald came to her doorstep with two other men, September 25th, 1963. It doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Anyone who says Oswald's in Mexico City should be considered suspect. You have an imposter. Nobody debates that. Obviously, there's a photo of an imposter. There's phony phone calls, but not one photo or scintilla of evidence ever that Lee Harvey Oswald was in Mexico City himself. Might have been there, but there's no evidence of it, no photos, nobody trails him. There's no, as Lee Rankin says, where's the itinerary? They simply say he stayed in his room and read books. I mean, give me, and then they said he probably went to a bullfight or probably went to a bullfight and went to the movies.
Did they get mixed up with Spain? Because I don't know how much bullfighting is going on.
No, Mexico City has bullfighting. They do. It's a big deal. Anyway, the point of the matter is they can't commit to him being anywhere because then they got to cover themselves, Eric. You see the trap that they're in? If they say he went to a bullfight, but now we got to get the guy who sold the tickets. We got to get the tickets. We got to get witnesses. We got to do all this crap. Anywhere they say he is, they got to prove it. So they don't say anything. They just say, well, we just, we don't know where he went, but he was there for 6 fucking days. 6 days, we don't know where he was, except this imposter who was at the embassy 5 times. I think it's 3 to the Soviets, 2 to the Cuban, or 3 to the Cuban, 2 to the Soviet. But nevertheless, this guy meets with Askew. There's a guy named Eusebio Askew. He is the Cuban consulate in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. He throws the guy out. The guy who says loudly, I need a permit, takes out a gun in the embassy. The Oswald impersonator takes a pistol out of his waistband saying, this is how I have to live because the FBI is all over me and I have to defend myself. And this guy, Askew, comes out. He's an employee of the consulate, and he throws out the Oswald impersonator out of the embassy, who is making a scene again, screaming and yelling about the Soviet visa. And so he is one of the guys who is forced to testify that Oswald did not come into that embassy, that it was an imposter. He did not get tortured like Sylvia Duran, but he was given a lot of trouble.
Sounds similar to the guy who wanted to shoot up the place to give himself an alibi.
Yeah, it could very well be. He didn't shoot the gun off, though. I think it was too close quarters. But what happens is David Atlee Phillips forms a group called, he retires in like 1975 at half pay. And he gets out and he forms a group called the Association of Retired Intelligence Officers, and immediately gets about 5,000 members. He changes the name to the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, which still exists to this day. It's a huge organization. He creates this literally overnight in September of 1975. But in his final analysis of the assassination, he said, my final take on the JFK assassination is there was a conspiracy likely including American intelligence officers. That's his quote at the end of his life. He will get lung cancer. He will get a phone call from a guy who's his brother, James Atlee Phillips, who he's estranged from because of his profession. James Atlee Phillips calls him up. He's dying of lung cancer, and he says, "Were you in Dallas on that day, November 22nd?" Which is what Veciana says. And he tells his brother yes, and his brother just hangs up the phone. And that was July 7th, 1988. He will die a couple of days later of lung cancer. This is him at the end with that super psychedelic shirt, which I wish I had. These people always end up in these psychedelic shirts trying to fit into the 1960s and 1970s. But
Sidney Gottlieb.
Sidney Gottlieb, who, by the way, said recently, I read recently, said that the Nixon entourage to the Soviet Union, not Nixon, but everyone else in his entourage was dosed with acid. And they were all tripping out of their minds, and they had to retreat back to the hotel that's the KGB dosed them. Gottlieb said this to Dick Russell, by the way. Dick Russell interviewed Gottlieb, and in that dinner, he said he told him about the Soviets dosing Nixon. Not personally, his entourage. Nixon wasn't dosed. That would have been insane. But everyone around him was dosed with acid. I've never heard that story before.
Wow, what a guy. What a guy. Well, as you can
anyway,
see,
if we ever meet Mark Halpern, I'd like to talk to Mark about growing. No, sir, I'm serious because I just found this out last night. I'd like to know how it was growing up across from David Atlee Phillips's house.
you should join two-way
And just raise that question.
Just call it. Why not? It would be freaking hilarious to see what his reaction would be, especially when you ask that. Just like
Nobody
what was
knows
it
that.
like growing up?
Yeah, that would
That
catch him off guard. That's for sure. But all these people live smushed together, Eric. You know that because they're all part of the intelligence and they all live in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, that's like Sean Spicer. They always joke every morning, "What's your neighbor doing?" Who's his neighbor? JD Vance.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he's like, "Well,
Yeah.
yeah, they're over there. They're doing this. They're doing that."
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, that figures. Well, folks, obviously, Mark's put in a ton of research, and in order to fortify himself for such research, he definitely has to dose himself with.
I dose myself.
Coffee. That's right. This is legal speed, if you
Wow,
will.
the magic bullet blend. Look at that. Hunley.
Yes, we even have a brand new flavor. So we have the original flavor, which is America's Untold Stories Supreme Breakfast Blend. But with the tariffs and everything, we had to experiment on creating another possible flavor just in case we couldn't sell the coffee. So that became the Magic Bullet Blend. It's
Wow.
unreal. Just like the Magic Bullet, the taste of this is unreal. And I think you will enjoy it. Now, to break it down for you, if you like a robust coffee, that's stronger for picking you up, energy, etc., and you just like a bold taste, that's going to be the Supreme Breakfast Blend. If you like a mellower coffee that's kind of, making you feel like a drawing room type of a setup, just a rich, full, luscious blend, that's Magic Bullet. So I encourage everybody, give them a try, and I'd love to have you try them back and forth and let us know which one you like better. I kind of am leaning towards the Magic Bullet Blend. I feel like I've been on a journey. Okay. And instead of worrying about just the pick-me-up aspect, I'm starting.
Where
to
do I
really
get that?
love the
America's Untold Stories?
.com/coffee. As you can see on the bottom there, there's a link in the description, or you can point your phone at the big-ass box in the middle.
Right on.
And check it out.
Right on. He rated before he died, he rated the intelligence agencies around the world, 1 through 5. This is Phillips on his own. He said the number one intelligence agency in the world is Mossad. Number 2 is CIA. Number 3 is MI6. 4 is KGB, and 5 is the Cuban DGI.
I thought the Cubans would be even higher.
Yeah, he did. They're number 5 in the world.
Okay.
You know, one of my favorite thing was, you know how different jobs have different hijinks, things they do. Different things in a different, like in the Army, you had different things to bust balls. You know what I mean? Like when you're in the Army, there's different weird things that are just related to the Army. They had a thing at the CIA he had to go back to New York to train as a CIA agent, an operative. They didn't take him to outside of line. They didn't take him to the farm. They took him to New York, and he was trained in a building and around New York City. And then he gets to the new Langley later, and they had a thing that they did to rookies called Operation Penis Envy. And they, no, I got to tell you this. This is so funny. And they would take in a rookie and they say, we've got this anti-Soviet propaganda thing we're going to do. We're going to airlift in 1 million condoms. We're going to drop them all across the USSR.
Paid for by USAID. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. He says, and we want to bring you into this project because we want you're new here. And we want you to spearhead this as one of your new projects. And he says, Operation Penis Envy is what we call it. And the guy chuckles nervously. And he says, we're going to airlift 1 million condoms. We're going to airlift them in. And he says, okay, what's the point? And he says, they're going to be so large. It's going to say, they're going to be the largest condoms ever made. And then they're going to say on the condom, made in the USA, size medium, right? And this is going to be a psychological warfare against the Soviets to break their spirits. And they did this to bust balls of the rookie. I thought it was funny. I don't know. I thought it was a crazy thing that they did.
It is funny.
I know. It's Operation Penis Envy. So anytime they'd see each other later in life at a cocktail party or something, they would say, hey, what happened to Operation Penis Envy?
Wow.
Anyway, I just wanted to add that in there. I thought it was funny.
No, and we want to talk about a coffee, and we're going to be in Dallas. So if you have questions,
oh yeah, if you want to talk about this, yeah,
or anything else, we are going to be in Dallas. Our presentation, I think, will be on the 22nd, so it'll actually be on the anniversary.
I think it's Saturday, the 23rd.
Saturday is the 22nd. I'll have to look at the calendar.
I have to look it up. Whatever it is, I think it's Saturday night.
Yeah, our presentation is on Saturday night, but it's not only
whatever day that is. It's a Saturday night.
Yes, all evening.
And
highly.
Wait a minute, you get a discount for this. That's great, Eric.
Well, not only do you get a discount for it, please use the discount. So save yourself money, but also it gives us credit for your coming to the show. Because again, we're trying to make our presence known that these are all the AUS people. And it just, it's kind of a flex, but it's very, very cool.
Well, they could wear their swag if they have a hat. That would help.
If you have a hat, if you have a badge. And we had this, one of our guests, Tom, actually made lanyards. AUS
oh,
lanyards,
I remember that. Yeah.
When we were there in 2023.
Was that Texas Tom? Was that who?
That was Texas Tom, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So we have some amazing people. It's a lot of fun. And honestly, Mark and I have an easier time with this because we don't have to think about the food or whatever. We have presentations, so we get to meet up with you. You know, when we have dinner, we can have dinner with you, and just it's a lot of stress off of us, and it allows us to interact with you even better. So definitely consider checking that out. I think you will enjoy it. Last time, it was a great time. I was bummed.
A lot of celebrities there. There's a lot of celebrities there. I don't mean celebrities like actors. I mean celebrities in the JFK research community who show up that you could get to talk to about your own harebrained schemes and theories.
Yeah, also it's not the only conference.
Man.
You can there are other ones going on too. So there's a lot of luminaries in the area all at the same time that we've traveled over to different places and talked to other people too. So there's a ton of options. It's like everything JFK descends that weekend.
Oh, did you have a snippet of the Lane debate with him?
Yeah.
We never played that. We play a little snippet of the Mark Lane because he after Lane goes first, he says something to the effect, "I must admit my reputation is not 100% intact after that presentation."
All right. Well, let me see.
Hello, I'm Ted Gandolfo, welcoming you to the 6th on June of this year. An open debate and confrontation for the
I'm going to jump forward to.
Yeah, just come forward. Yeah.
James Earl Ray.
Over the years and those responsible. Serious
Well, that's lame.
confrontation between the victims of the excesses of the intelligence organizations over the years and those responsible for those excesses. This is not the ultimate step. This is not a trial at Nuremberg. Perhaps that will come.
That scares him. That freaks him out. That did freak him out. He
We are
said,
now beginning the very opening stages of a dialogue. And we will talk about character assassination, Mr. Phillips. We really will.
So was this
okay.
Lane warning him that you could be in my crosshairs later in a
Absolutely.
lawsuit?
Dude, it freaks the fuck out of David Atlee Phillips. And he wrote about it in his book. And Lane, if you read Plausible Denial, Lane has the best chapter destroying the Mexico City story of any book, going back even before that. But Plausible Denial, the book he wrote, the second book, he has a whole chapter completely dismantling Mexico City. And in this debate, when he mentions Nuremberg, Phillips freaks out because he believes that's possible, that there could be trials where he would be put on trial for crimes against humanity. And he turns white, according to Mark Lane.
Well, here's the paragraph what you were talking about here. Phillips, Mexico City, Mr. Phillips, what is the truth about Mexico City?
Oh, yeah, this kid yells it out in the audience.
Phillips looks directly at the man and began, Mr. Lane has said that what happened in Mexico City and the report given by the CIA is wrong, 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 wrong. He has combined some truth and much misstatement to come up with his conclusions. Now, I'm not in a position today to talk to you about the inner workings of the CIA station in Mexico City. I'm not in a position to talk to others about the details of my testimony before Mr. Sprague in executive session, but I will tell you this, that when the record comes out, we will find that there was never a photograph taken of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico City.
Right on.
We will find out that Lee Harvey Oswald never visited. Let me put it. That is a categorical statement there.
Yep.
There. We will find out there is no evidence, first of all, that there's no proof of that. Second, there is no evidence to show that Lee Harvey Oswald visited the Soviet embassy.
Right on. Right on.
I sat there stunned. Phillips had confessed.
Absolutely. I don't know what Jefferson Morley and other people are talking about, this whole Mexico City Oswald thing. It's completely delusional, and it makes them highly suspect in my book as to who their puppet masters are. If you believe that the Zapruder film has been altered, you're helping the CIA. If you believe that Oswald was in Mexico City, you're helping the CIA. I don't know why you would help the CIA directly or indirectly, but it does. And it helps lighten the burden of the actual killers of the president. Mark Lane dismantles in great detail the Mexico City, like I said in the book Plausible Denial, and he does it here in this debate in 1977 at USC, and he is clearly shaken up by this debate. He did not expect this to be as direct as it was.
Well, he's been through litigation before.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting there with a lawyer,
Yeah.
and this guy is sketch as hell, in your opinion anyway, he's laying out testimony, if you will. So anything Phillips says technically could come up in a court case. So now you've got to be like, shit, what
Not
am I
only
saying
that,
in public?
Mark Lane reveals the tape that we heard of Phillips behind closed doors with the assassination committee. And Phillips said, where did you get that information from? And he said, it was given to me, and it was allowed to be given to me legally. And there was no caveat. I signed nothing, says Mark Lane. And that testimony is brought up verbally by Mark Lane in that debate at USC in 1977. And that shakes Phillips to his core. He walked into a buzzsaw that day at USC. He did not expect this to be happening.
Yeah, no problem.
But I mean, he couldn't be more definitive about Oswald in Mexico City. I mean, this is the station chief saying he wasn't there. The debate is over. I don't even know how this debate ever came back around.
Yeah, no, it was clear in that statement that was there. He made it clear that was a categorical statement that we'll find no evidence.
Yeah.
And
in fact, there never has been any evidence. They had to manufacture evidence. That's why I've said my entire life, the Achilles heel of the Kennedy assassination is in Mexico City, because they're framing a guy that supposedly they don't even know, who's going to kill a man who's the president of the United States. And that is September 27th to September 28th, a month before November 22nd, roughly, before it even happens. And there lies their complicity in the crime of the century. That's it. That's it. There is the complicity.
all right, and now we'll get some support in here. AUS, nicest community online. Chat, love, Cork, Ireland. Yeah, except I don't know what Mark said when I left here, but the chat has been going bonkers.
About what?
About my leaving for a minute. I said I'll be right back.
I just continue with my story. I didn't.
I'm sure. All right, Grandpa got off fat ass and got my ticket for Dallas Lancer.
Okay,
Awesome.
there. How hard was that, Grandpa?
And I think Grandpa lives in Texas. So
then
no
it's
excuse.
It's not, he lives next to the building.
No doubt. Spinner Pete, Robert Mitchum saying Calypso. You can't do that anymore if you're a white.
Well, what was Harry Belafonte? He was like he was Caribbean, I guess.
Let me see. Mike Schaefer. Was David Atlee Phillips part of the JM Wave?
He went in and out. He really wasn't running JM Wave. He was a guy who was too big for JM Wave in terms of career, to stay there and run it. Like I said, he had that radio station on Swan Island. And then even with the Cuban thing, he was in DC with the Bay of Pigs, and he was in and out of Miami. So he was floating in and out.
Yeah, I think JM Wave is this guy.
Yeah, that's it. That's the white whale of Jefferson Morley. He wants this guy to be arrested in the afterlife, I think. What's his name?
Giannides. George Giannides.
Joanides.
Or Joanides, sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Pew Pew gifted 20 America's Untold Stories memberships, which we always
I want to know what happened to Sandy Mac's liquor store in Santiago, Chile, the one he owned.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Mike Schaefer, was Murchison Hunt Oil part of the LBJ Democrat Southern Private Intelligence Network?
I don't think he really needed that. I mean, once he became president, I mean, all bets were off. I mean, in other words, his operation, even though they might have been emotionally supporting him, he didn't really need them. I mean, this thing was so inside the game. This is way beyond Murchison and Hunt in terms of having admirals, medical people perform an autopsy, a photopsy, as I called it at Bethesda. This is way past Hunt, way past Murchison in terms of penetration into the deep state.
Yep. The story that Oswald was a commie is also swallowed by a lot of conservatives as well. They like to include Oswald in their list of crazy leftists. Absolutely true. That's why it worked well.
Yeah, I mean, he did have socialist leanings. He did, when he went to Minsk, he was just uncomfortable with the structure of the Soviet Union, but he liked reading. He liked the ideas of socialism. As a kid, he liked like a lot of kids do. I mean, I did too.
College kid.
Yeah, a lot of kids do. I mean, and he went to the Soviet Union, and he said, "I've had enough of this. This sucks." And he literally, even before he left, he was already rebelling against the Soviet commie structure there.
Well, that reminds me, we were talking with some fans of the show when we were doing the meetup in Las Vegas, and they were talking about their kid who was communist or wannabe communist or whatever, and was demanding to go to China. They wanted to really see a communist country to see what it's all about. And the parents were like, no, that's pretty dangerous. But I suggested to him, I'm like, send him to Cuba. You want to
let him go to Cuba.
Live in Cuba for a year or so. He'll learn all about communism.
Yeah, I believe this taking over the Warsaw Pact countries, this is my new theory, was payback for what the Soviets did to us in Central and South America. That's why I think we were so hard on them now, historically now, and putting them in NATO and dealing with them in their own backyard in Eastern Europe as payback for what they did in Cuba, for what they did in Nicaragua, for what they did in Venezuela. I think it's payback. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know geopolitically, but I think that's the strategy that they use to the losers of this 30-year war.
Maybe. Mike Schaefer, Mark, how do you keep track of so many facts? I can't remember yesterday's breakfast.
I don't remember yesterday's breakfast either, but these
Either
facts I've been
coffee.
Yeah,
No.
these facts I've been reading about for a long time. I mean, with the book fund, I mean, I got like some new books recently, thanks to whoever gave us donations to the book fund. Thank you, because there's a lot of new stuff out there. I mean,
There was
there's
a huge donation that I sent.
yeah, I mean, there's people who are making small donations to the book fund and huge ones, or want to remain anonymous. That's cool. But there's others who make small, and that's, it allows me to buy these books. I'm constantly hassling Hunley to find a PDF for them, but not all of them are in PDF. I mean, some of them.
You had one for
From Phillips.
Phillips that I
Secret War, dude. Hard to find Secret Wars by Phillips. I mean, anyway, that's kind of my life is buying these books and finding new factoids in them. Older books. I mean, there are some new ones, but they basically. It's the older books that I
they're out of print, and what's funny is that half of the time they're library cast-offs that are selling for hundreds and
they stole them from the library. Yeah.
Well, they're not even stolen; they're discarded.
You're right.
Leslie was a librarian, and after so long, a book doesn't move at the library, and then they just sell it at the library sale or whatever for $1 or $2 or nothing. It's like sometimes 10 for $1, depending on the books. And then they're suddenly selling later. So people are, that's how it works. Dr. Evil, how did it go, Hunley? Fantastic. Thank you for asking.
I know. That's a strange question.
I hope it's worth the investment. David March. Hi, guys. Sorry I missed you in Vegas. I was very sick. Sorry to hear that. Mark, have you ever heard of Dean Stockwell? Dean or Dean? There's Dean Stockwell, the actor who was I don't. But then there's CIA whistleblower. Same guy?
I don't think it's the same guy. It's another Stockwell.
Okay, well, I know of Dean Stockwell, the actor. I don't know if you know of Dean Stockwell, the whistleblower, but
I know of both.
Oh, well, there you go. So I guess it answers that. Let's see, Fletcher Boy, HL.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Urban anti-communist.
No doubt about it. He tried to get Walker elected governor of Texas, which we covered. And then he wanted Walker to be president. Can't blame him from his point of view. He felt that LBJ moved too far to the left for Hunt's sake. I'm talking about Hunt.
Wow. Cale Horton. Hello again from New Orleans. Finally caught up with y'all live. Random question. What did officials ever say about the puff of smoke that appeared from the picket Spence? I know it was caught on camera. I don't think it's been conclusively.
It was never addressed. They didn't address it.
Yeah.
It wasn't addressed. They said that the Carcano could emit smoke from it, but that was the Carcano rifle, not the the situation behind the picket fence.
All right. And there may be breaking news in this next super chat. I'll be sad to hear it, though. Saying you are both great. Thank you, RIP. I'm guessing he's saying David Horowitz.
I don't know what that means, but.
Well, RIP, died. David Horowitz. I don't know if that's what he's saying. But...
Okay.
So, I mean, hopefully David Horowitz didn't pass away. I just looked up and he's 86, according to what I saw, but it's possible that he just passed on. I don't know.
One of the things that Phillips did, which is amazing, is he had a recording of bombings happening in the Guatemalan capital that he played over the radio. And there were no bombings, so they had to get a plane to drop one bomb, which was just a bunch of explosives strapped together, and they had a guy fly over the Capitol building and drop it because they kept recordings of these bombings happening to get people, excited that the Civil War was happening. It was War of the Worlds, though. It was kind of War of the Worldish.
Well, it makes me think that. I mean, if you're going to fake everything, it's brilliant. By the way, folks, I was looking it up and I couldn't read that last super chat if it was Horowitz or whatever, but it seems like David Horowitz is just fine. I don't see anything.
Can we move on with these false death statements? I mean, come on.
Well,
anyway, so Phillips, Phillips, are you going to go down this rabbit hole now? Or
no, if somebody shared something, I'm just looking at it because I don't want to make an ass of myself. And I'm here too. So, occasionally.
Go ahead.
All right. So what do you want to say?
Oh, I was going to say that a Guatemalan pilot defected. They got him drunk and they wanted him to get on the radio to tell the other pilots to defect. And he said, I don't want to do that. I've got family there. I don't want to get involved in that. So they put a tape recorder under the couch and they said, well, what would you say if you wanted to reach the other pilots and make them defect? And he goes into a whole long speech, drunk, Eric, that's broadcasted out unbeknownst to the pilot who defected, which I thought was a pretty cool trick.
Okay. All
I mean, some dirty tricks are smarter than others.
Yeah, I mean, a dirty trick is a dirty trick. If it's effective, I mean, you gotta. It's clever. I mean, I gotta give it to him. And anytime you can conduct an operation without people getting harmed or injured, through psychological warfare. Some of my favorite war stories, about it wasn't Robert E. Lee. It's one of the Civil War generals. They were facing McClellan and the Union, and so they were marching their soldiers in a circle. And it made it look like it was a giant brigade.
Right.
I love stuff like that.
I love that. I mean, what happened with the Dominican Republic was there were tens of thousands of people who died. They were not because of him, just because of the Civil War.
Sure.
And that's when LBJ sends in the Marines to put an end to this thing. But if that's why the Guatemala thing was so impressive, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially when we've screwed up so many other operations. I mean, Guatemala is pretty smooth. Bay of Pigs, not so damn much, obviously.
Well, he cites JFK pulling the chicken switch on air support. I mean, and that does throw a monkey wrench into the entire operation, Eric.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, either way, we are going to continue our discussion over on Locals at unstructured.locals.com.
Okay.
You could be a member for free.
Okay.
Continue watching. Or you could choose to support us there, which we always deeply appreciate.
Okay.
There's a link in the description. It'll take you immediately to this episode. You can look down below, whatever platform you're on, and click it and be continuing right there. And we hope to see folks momentarily.
Over there.